Welcome to the Stereoactive Movie Club. My name is Jeremiah, and I'm here with Alicia, Mia, Steven, and our special guest for this round of movies, Michelle. And we're going to be talking about the 1925 film Battleship Potemkin, directed by Sergei Eisenstein. But before we go on, let's hear from everyone about one movie they've watched recently that they want to talk about here. Steven, what have you been watching?
I saw Creed, which I had never seen before. It was a 2015 movie, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. And Ryan Coogler directed it. He also directed the first Black Panther and the second Black Panther movie. It was really amazing. I was pleasantly surprised by it. I went into it blind. I was thinking, it's just another sequel, another Rocky movie, but it actually stood on its own pretty well. And just the direction was pretty incredible. And using Philly, it felt like a real character. And the person was Michael B. Jordan he was phenomenal. And he had a really good chemistry, I thought, with Sylvester Stallone. And it felt like he was like an older character, which he is. He felt like he was grizzled and he was seasoned. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was really great. And I think, wasn't he nominated for an Academy Award for that role?
Yeah. Should have won, I think. But
yeah, I thought he was really amazing in it. So yeah, I watched Creed 2. It wasn't as good, but it still was good. But the first Creed was great.
Yeah, I recently rewatched that too. I think because it just came onto HBO Max, probably because Creed 3 is out in theaters, so they're capitalizing on that. But yeah, it's even better than I remembered it, honestly. It's a really good movie. But yeah, I was not a huge fan of Creed 2 when I saw that in theaters. I haven't watched it since, but yeah, it's definitely not as good in my memory. Alicia, how about you?
The only thing I've been watching really is I watched the reboot of Party Down, which was fun, and just some other nothing too special. So sorry, but that's it for me this time.
So, do you recommend the reboot of Party Down for people who are fans of the original version of the show?
Yeah. Definitely.
Good. Okay. And Michelle,
I'm with Alicia. I did not make it to the movies this week just because of my work schedule. But when I could take a break, I watch shows with Zoe, and we finished up Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and we binged 7 seasons of that series, and it was 136 episodes, and it was kind of sad to say goodbye to it, and but. Yeah, it was like our bonding series. She's really into the MCU, and it was fun. And it was funny because when we first started it, she found it. And when we first started it, I thought, oh yeah, that's right. When Coulson shows up in all the Marvel movies, I'm like, oh, I don't know why I didn't like him as a character. And he's like, the lead in this. And I really, saw him differently. And it was really fun. But a Marvel fan friend of mine had advised me to stop after season 5. And I could see why, but we had to see it to the end. But it definitely got more convoluted and forced, and it, But has anybody else seen it?
Yeah, I saw all 7 seasons.
Did you too? Yeah.
And I agree with everything you said. It took me a while because season 1 I dropped it because I was like, this is just not good. But then someone said power through because it gets better, and it really did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the 5th season, I'm one of those people that's a completist, and once I get started on something, I have to see it through, even if I don't like it.
Exactly.
But yeah, it wound up pretty well. It was fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It kind of went off the rails a little bit, but yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
And Mia, how about you?
I also haven't watched any movies, but I have been rewatching Girls. Which there was a week or two ago, there was a New York Times article about how everyone's rewatching Girls. And I would just like to say that I've been talking about rewatching Girls for some time. Jeremiah can verify this well before this New York Times article.
You deserve so much credit for that.
I'm just putting it out there. But it's been kind of fun because obviously I watched it when I was a girl and that age and living in Brooklyn, and literally my friends and I were like, this is our lives. Oh my God. So it's fun to rewatch it and both be oh wow, just on the other side of it in all the ways, basically. And a friend of mine who was a New York City friend, I mean, is still a friend, but we were living in New York and being the girls together, is also watching it. So it's just been fun to have that with her.
No comment.
Jeremiah is not. He's not watching it with me.
I watched the first episode or two. I mean, I watched it when it came out, but I just don't really feel a need to watch it again.
It's okay. You weren't a girl then. So, I understand.
I wasn't then, and I'm still not. Well, I went and saw John Wick Chapter 4, and I had a lot of fun. I've enjoyed those movies. I think I would have enjoyed this more if not for the audience I saw it with, unfortunately, because I had the unlucky experience of having some people sitting near me who were pretty distracting for a while, and they eventually left. And that was great. But, sometimes once you're out of the movie, you just like never get back into it as fully as you'd like to be. So I kind of want to see it again, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get back to see it in a movie theater. But I just remember I didn't see the first two in theaters, but then I caught up with them after so many people were saying how good they were. And so then I did see the third one in theaters and was kind of blown away by it because, I mean, it's not for everyone, but I was just very, very taken by the choreography of it. And, just the stunt work is amazing. A lot of what they do is very imaginative in its way. And it was just like a lot of fun and visually kind of amazing in multiple ways. And I went into Chapter 4 hoping for that same sort of like blown away feeling. And like I said, I'm not sure I was going to get it in that theater with that audience, which is too bad. But it's definitely worth seeing for fans of the series so far. So I do recommend it.
It's funny that you say that, Jeremiah, because I saw Shazam! Fury of the Gods actually 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to talk about the movie because it was really terrible.
I've heard.
But the audience, like there was 5 people that were talking pretty much the entire time, like when I was watching it. So it sort of took me out. But the movie was kind of boring. So It was fine. Like the dialogue wasn't difficult to follow. So it was okay that they were talking. But still, I can understand that.
Yeah.
It ruined the experience a little bit.
So for those who may not have listened to the show before, this is a podcast where we discuss movies on Sight and Sound Magazine's poll of the greatest movies ever made that comes out every 10 years. And again, this time we're talking about Battleship Potemkin. But before we get into the history and background of the movie, what did each of us know about it going into this viewing? Who had seen it before? And if not, what were you expecting, if anything? And Mia, since you picked this one, can you start us off and also remind us why you chose it?
Sure. So I had not seen this before, and I didn't really know much about it. I assumed it was about a ship. But beyond that, what? Oh. Beyond that, I really didn't know much. I just knew it was one of the older films on our list, but was ranked pretty highly, which at least we're getting down to the films that we are, I don't want to say left with, but the films that we're still going through. A lot of the older ones tended to be like, maybe they were on the list once or twice early on, but they haven't necessarily consistently been on the list. So they're not really ranked as highly. So this was one of the few left for me that was an older film that still had a pretty high rating. So I was curious about it. And I didn't really know anything about it, but I've heard Jeremiah reference it over the years. So yeah, I was just curious about it and excited to see it.
Okay. And Michelle?
Definitely was aware of it from film classes in the past, particularly the Odessa Steps sequence, which I have seen, but I had not seen the entire movie. So I was really looking forward to finally getting the chance to do that. Or I've always had the chance to do it, but to have a reason to do it. But yeah, and then also, I've been aware of the Russian filmmaking influence on editing and the montage style. So
yeah, and for our listeners, you are an editor, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
I'd love, as we get into the discussion a little later, to hear like what you thought of it as an editor. Yeah, so let's come back to that maybe.
For sure.
Alicia, how about you?
I also didn't know too much of what it was about. I knew it was, a silent film and it was Russian. And that's about all I knew. It was one of the ones on our list that I was kind of not looking forward to watching. But I'm glad we've done it. So.
Okay. Steven?
I'd heard of the movie before. It's pretty famous as far as the movie being called Battleship Potemkin. I actually thought it was a lot longer too. I thought for some reason it was like a 3-hour movie, and it was I didn't even know it was a silent movie. But I did know that it was one of the more popular movies or one of the more like viewed movies in film schools and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I was looking forward to seeing it. And like Michelle said, I'd never had an occasion to kind of break it out and watch it. So I felt like this was a good opportunity for us all to kind of sit down and watch it. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, for me, I think I watched this in high school when I was like learning about movies, kind of teaching myself about them, reading up about stuff and all that. I think I rented it from the library in Lafayette, Louisiana, which had a pretty good collection of old movies actually on VHS. And then I definitely saw at least clips, if not the whole movie, in college at film school. And, you know, we talked about the movie as an example of all sorts of things, especially related to editing. So, yeah, to me, this is like one of the foundational movies of cinematic history. I think it is one of those movies where you can say there's movies before it and then there's movies after it. It really changed things. Everything that came before it, it sort of like took from that and then made up new rules for certain things that then other movies could build off of. So I think it's very important, and it was nice to watch it again for the first time in a long time, other than little clips or whatever. So that's where we stood on the film before watching it for this episode. And we'll get more into the film in just a moment. But first, let's take a break. And we're back. So, as we did in our episode on Apocalypse Now, the first we recorded after the 2022 Sight and Sound list came out, I thought I'd start us off by reading from Sight and Sound's entry for this film on their website. As always, the parts that may be more subjective aren't from me personally, but perhaps we can delve into those things as we get into our group discussion. A fixture in the critical canon almost since its premiere, Sergei Eisenstein's film about a 1905 naval mutiny was revolutionary in both form and content. Declared the greatest film of all time at the 1958 Brussels World's Fair, and one of the only films to have appeared on all of Sight and Sound's critics' polls, 1952 to 2022, Battleship Potemkin has also been widely censored, as much out of fear of the perceived influence of its ideas as for any contentious material on screen. In essence, it tells a 5-part story of a naval mutiny leading to full-blown revolution, but while this material could be crudely propagandist in other hands, Eisenstein uses images of such dynamic compositional strength and editing of such frame-perfect precision that it's hard not to be swept along, regardless of personal politics. Despite endless quotation and parody, the set-piece massacre on the Odessa steppes still packs a sledgehammer punch. And here are a few quotes from the Sight and Sound entry by people who voted for it in 2022. Ian Aitken said that no other film in the history of cinema has had such a revolutionary impact. Ethne O'Neill, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, sorry about that, said that historically, Battleship Potemkin is unsurpassed in its impact, the perfect blend of aesthetic and social commitment of the collective and the individual, of thought and emotion. And James Leo Cahill called it a factory for some of the most iconic images in the medium's history, which aim at doing nothing less than obliterating and reconfiguring our vision of the world and our commitment to transforming it. Eisenstein equally reveals himself to be a committed sensualist and wit. Who can watch this film and not appreciate its desirous homoerotic gaze? Again, that was all from Sight and Sound's website. Divided into 5 acts, Battleship Potemkin, in commemoration of the 20th anniversary of what is known as the First Russian Revolution of 1905, tells the story of a mutiny aboard the titular Russian naval vessel. In the film's telling, the crew's refusal to eat borscht made from maggot-infested meat is the first domino in a series of events that leads to a sort of mini-revolution in the port city of Odessa. And in the reality of the time when the film was made and released, it effectively helps to connect the still very new USSR to the historical struggles of its citizens under the previous Tsarist regime by portraying the institutional power of those sailors as aligned with the people at a time when the Soviet regime had much to gain from its people believing in such an alignment. While the film was produced intentionally as propaganda, Eisenstein also used it as a vehicle to further his own experimentation with the concept of what he called montage. Of course, while he may have had his own personal artistic motivations for this exploration, it is also undeniable that his work was itself influenced by and part of the Soviet effort to use the medium of film for its own purposes. The film was considered shocking at the time for its use of graphic violence, much of which has been referenced in other films over the years, especially the Odessa Steppes sequence. But even criticism of the film seems to acknowledge the power of its craft. As for our purposes, Battleship Potemkin was in the top 10 of Sight and Sound's Critics Survey every decade, from the very first poll in 1952 up until 2002. In 2012, it ranked at number 11, making it a runner-up, and in the 2022 poll, it was tied at number 54. It's never been in the top 10 of the Directors Survey, and in the 2022 poll, it was tied at number 93. Among the filmmakers who had it on their top 10 list in 2022 are Michael Mann and Sally Potter. So, Mia, again, since this was your pick, can you start us off with your thoughts on the film and whether it met your expectations?
So I really enjoyed the film. I was a little trepidatious going into it. I'm not a big fan of war movies, and I was kind of nervous that this was going to be just like ships battling other ships and things like that, and have all the like, oh, I can't really tell who's who and what's going on. And all the silent movies I think that I have seen have been comedies. So, and this is very obviously not a comedy. So I was also a little
Intolerance, but that's a whole other thing. So
yes, we did see Intolerance. You're right. But okay, out of the 3 silent movies I've seen, 2 of them have been comedies, and obviously rely very much on like physical humor and things like that. So I was just a little okay, like Russian silent war, like the trifecta of 3 things that might make this a difficult watch. But I was like, okay, it's only like 90 minutes. So, but anyways, I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was not the typical war movie at all. And I really loved the, sure, propaganda, but like the message behind it. Like, yeah, like 2 minutes into it, I was like, throw that doctor in the water. And so I was really happy when that happened. And the just, the film techniques, like I know I'm sure like we'll get into that more. And that's definitely not my area of expertise by a long shot. But just, watching it and knowing that this was made in the 1920s, like even just some of the shots, I was like, how did they do this? Like, this is wild. Like, I really loved that shot of they had the when they're like, oh, hey, hang everyone who refused to eat. And they have like that like split second kind of shot of like the bodies hanging there. And you think it's, I at least thought like, oh, wait, did they flash forward? Did this happen here? Like, I thought that was so cool. Obviously like the whole Odessa Steppes scene, I was just like completely gripped from start to finish, very stressed out about the baby and the older woman and that the little boy and everything. It was just like, I was very nervous and anxious and there was so much tension. And I know we're going to talk later about like, does this film hold up? But yes. And anyways, yeah, I just thought like it was such a fantastic movie. I totally understand like why this has been on the list all this time and ranked so highly. And, for such a short film made so long ago, Russian silent war, like, wow, what an incredible movie.
Yeah, I think it's actually only 70 something minutes.
It's very short.
Even better.
Yeah, exactly.
I like shorter movies for sure. And yeah, I just thought this one, like they waste no time getting into it. It's very, very Russian, very sparse, very direct to the point. Yeah, I thought it was really great. And I don't know too, I don't think any of the people in it were like actors, really. They were just, right?
I'm not sure about that. I didn't look into that part for this. But
I didn't do like quite as much digging as I normally do, but I read something about when he was making the movie that it was going to be this, originally they wanted it to be like all these different scenes from the revolution and it was going to be this whole thing. And then they basically just like ran out of time and he was like, I'm just going to pick one. And so, but I thought I read somewhere that he was saying he was looking for more like a type of person than necessarily experienced people. So, which I also thought was pretty amazing that he just like probably had a bunch of, and which I mean, duh, like it's not like at that time there was like tons of like here's my reel or something like that,
Right,
who
right.
was like a super experienced actor then. But anyways, so I just thought that was really interesting too, that it was probably a bunch of people's first only film too. And it's this like incredibly influential, famous movie.
Steven, how about you?
Yeah, I really did enjoy this movie more than I expected to. And like Mia said, it's it's a Russian war movie, so how exciting could it be? But it actually really moved me, and maybe that just plays into my personality a bit, that like I'm swayed by propaganda, because I was definitely on board for having the people that were kind of downtrodden, or the people that were actually the crew members. I felt really sympathetic towards them from the very beginning. And I think that that's part of the reason why he picked people who weren't necessarily actors and wanted a type, because you did really understand them and see how they were without any kind of pretense to it. Because I know a lot of movies, especially now, they definitely cast people that, they might look like they're crew people, but they're actually actors and they're built a different way. But these people looked very authentic for what they were. So I did really enjoy that part of it. And then the use of facial expressions were really good. And you kind of went along with it just from the very beginning of it. And then also just the empathy with the lower classes really worked for me. And even the crowd scenes, like everybody's had such an individual style to them that it just really helped, kind of sell, these people were, they were ripe to kind of revolt, just by seeing what they were doing. So overall, I just thought it was just impressive to look at. And I remembered some of the shots that I really liked, especially when the crewman got killed and then they were in Odessa, they were marching to see him. And just those crowd shots were just incredible. And being 1925 or 28 or whenever this movie was made, it's just impressive shots. And thinking about how they put those together were, it's just something that's incredible to even think about now, the logistics of doing that kind of work and how many special effects they might have had for what it was. But overall, yeah, it was just a very powerful movie. And I was able to watch it twice and get a little bit more out of it the second time. So, because it was so short.
Alicia, how about you?
Oh no, I feel like I'm going to be the party pooper today.
I knew it. I was watching your face. I was like, Alicia didn't like it.
Well, I will say I did think that the Odessa step sequence was really powerful. And I do give it its props or whatever for filmmaking. Like I understand it did a lot of revolutionary stuff. In terms of just enjoying watching it, I had a hard time telling people apart. And I thought some of the stuff was a little too silent. I mean, I know it's a silent movie and everything, but I still thought some of the sequences went on a little bit long. For me, I had a hard time maintaining my interest and attention. Yeah, but so I feel bad saying that, but I just didn't enjoy watching it except for the Odessa stuff. And then I will say I do think they did a good job. I think Steven mentioned it a little bit, but I do think that they did a great job of bringing in that feeling that revolution was brewing, revolution was in the air. And I think this takes place almost a decade before the full blown Bolshevik revolution. So that was interesting because I didn't know that had happened that long in advance.
Yeah, I think it's 12 years before, because I think that was in 1917 and this is 1905.
Yeah, something I know it's 1916 or 17, something like that. So I mean, I did learn something. And I learned in doing the research around it about the editing techniques and everything. I didn't know about that before, and that definitely added another dimension to it for me. So maybe if I watch it again, maybe that would allow me to enjoy it a little more. But it was just a tough watch for me. So anyway,
so the Russian Revolution is said to have lasted from March of 1917 through June of 1923. So really not even over for that long before this movie is made and comes out. So
yeah,
you can kind of really see what they were about with making a movie like this,
Yeah, I think the other thing that kind of maybe soured it for me was just knowing that I, of course, like, yes, please overthrow your absolute monarchs and everything. But
Mhm.
like knowing that what came after it was also
Sure.
like not great. I was just kind of like, should I? I mean, I know I'm supposed to be in favor of this, but like, it's hard. It's a hard one.
Right. Michelle, how about you?
I also really enjoyed it. I actually thought the words after watching it, thanks Mia for picking it, because I don't know how many more years I would have gone without watching it. And actually, my 10-year-old daughter Zoe got sucked into the movie
wow.
as well.
Wow. Oh, we should have had
That's
her on the
pretty good.
podcast.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
Guessed. This as a war movie, in my opinion, I feel like most great war movies are actually anti-war movies, right? Like they're not really about the war. And for this movie, why I found it very moving and engaging was it. I think you spoke to it, Stephen. Like it's the oppressed versus the oppressor. The underdog versus And so I think Act One on the ship really set that up really well. Yes, in broad strokes, and like to what you mentioned, Alicia, like you don't really get to know. There's not like one hero. Well, there is the hero who, but I found it kind of interesting too. I think it kind of ties in with their theme of all for one and one for all, and which also is about revolution. And then as far as it being a propaganda film, I feel like what films kind of aren't, like, and thinking about editing too. And this movie is so influential. As an editor, when I try to explain to people and family what I do, and people just don't get it, and they think I'm a literary editor, or they think that I take out the curse words of movies. Like literally, I've seriously had people think that. And I try to explain it like this, like, when you shoot something on your camera and you just let it run, is that going to be engaging to watch? No. And anyway, I just think that it's interesting because it makes me think that, especially now in 2023, everyone is, a sophisticated movie watcher. It's so ingrained, like, and that's what the best editing is, that you don't notice how you're being manipulated, and you don't, except for some of the shots, like the metric style, right, that they talked about. And I like in the first act when, we're seeing the crew, work, and it's very mechanical. And then there are like the close-ups of like the different pieces of equipment going in and into each other and round, and the labor, it's very rhythmic. And, but yeah, I just enjoyed it on all levels, like I think that like sensory wise and like, intellectually, like I was very much impressed by and appreciated all the techniques, not just the editing, but like the lighting. I loved the score. I'd love to watch it with the Pet Shop Boys score sometime. I listened to it, very synthy. And but also I was totally engaged viscerally too. And I think because of like what was going on with, the editing and then like it also felt like a documentary to me as well, but with those the editing style that kind of added another layer of storytelling. But yeah, and I loved the non-actors, their faces, like the one weeping older woman on the dock, and yeah, they were super captivating. So
yeah, I think other than his innovations in editing, I think a strength of Eisenstein's is casting. Either casting and or having a really good makeup and costume departments to have these characters be so recognizable. Because I think Stephen mentioned it, that you can kind of like really tell the people apart. Alicia, not so much. She didn't think so.
Like dark jacket or light jacket? Okay.
But I think Stephen said that he appreciated that about it, or something along those lines. And I think that's true. Like I can visualize right now faces from this movie, And even if I hadn't watched the movie just in the last couple of days, some of those faces I recognized when we watched it a couple of days ago because they've been stuck in my head for 25 years since I watched it as a kid. Like and also because I see stills from this movie in things I read about movies and stuff all the time. So I'm not saying it's not partially that, but there's a reason that those are the stills that they pull. It's because these are faces that stick out in this movie in a good way. And I think it gives you something that, yeah, I think sometimes is missing in a lot of silent films, of like faces that you can kind of track and kind of watch through a scene and keep track of and actually be a character. Like you don't have a voice to go by, you know, you don't have the things that we're used to in this day and age. So I think casting and just making a character really pop was key, and he was good at doing that. In addition to, like I said, all the innovations that he's responsible for or championed, one or the other or both. I do want to say that, like, I think it's funny that I think one or two of you mentioned you thought that this was going to be some long, boring movie because you heard it was a Russian war movie. And I mean, I think there's a reason that you might have thought that too. Like, I recently started to watch the Soviet War and Peace adaptation from the 60s, which is 7 hours long.
Oh my
God. I haven't gotten through it. Like I said, I started to watch it, but it's impressive in its own way, but it's a very different type of storytelling, but in a way for the same reason. They were trying to, as far as I understand, with that movie, like, make the people of the Soviet Union proud of their heritage. And in the same way that they were kind of doing in a way with Battleship Potemkin, of making them think about their past and feel connected to it in a way that the Soviet Union, the powers that be, found useful for their cause of, you know, kind of controlling the masses, so to speak, or rallying the masses if you want to be generous. But either way, I also thought that, Michelle, you made a good point about most war movies are anti-war movies. I think that is definitely true. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that this is essentially a pro-war movie. It's pro a specific war for specific reasons. And it makes you, if you are invested in the movie, if the movie does the trick it is meaning to do and it works for you, you're on the side of the people who want essentially a war here, a revolution, because a revolution is a war. And it's not every day that I think a lot of people watch a war movie and think, like, this looks like a good idea. So I think it's impressive that it can do that. But yeah, and then what you said about, Michelle, people don't know what it means to be an editor. I think that is, I've run into that sometimes. Like, I think people often think that an editor just makes something shorter. Yeah. Like, I've run into that where people just think, well, this movie was 3 hours long, so it needed a better editor. Like, that's not what that means.
Yeah.
It's not about, like, the length of the thing. It's about how it fits together. Like, the editor is the person who helps make the decisions about what makes the movie work, like puts the blocks that they were handed, the building blocks of the movie, together in some form that actually makes it a whole that people will enjoy or it will have an effect on. It is hard to explain to people.
It is. Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, do people think that it's all in camera? Like, you know, you shoot something, you pause, and then you, like, you know, get the right shot. You know, you just do that all day. I don't know.
See, I think people think directors do more than they do.
True.
As someone who, like, doesn't actually work on movies or television, but, like, you know, I mean, I remember having this, you make movies shorter conversation with Jeremiah pretty early on. So,
oh, you do? I don't remember that.
Yeah, you were like, it's not just about making them shorter. I mean, I don't think I was like, so you make things shorter. I'm not that dumb, but, like, you know, anyways, but, like, I think that people think that the director knows how they want the movie to be, like, exactly, you know, and that then the editor is like, oh, okay, I'm just, like, stitching things together, basically.
Right.
So,
well, some do.
Sure. Yeah. Everyone's different.
The story with Hitchcock was that he would always say, like, I've already made the movie in my head. It's boring for me from there on because it's just like putting the pieces in place. Like, he knows what shots he wants.
Yeah.
He goes and he shoots them. And there's even stories of him, I think, and also John Ford because like at that time they were part of the studio system of Hollywood, that they knew that an editor could really do something to their movie that they didn't want them to do. So there's stories about them only shooting the shots they knew they needed instead of doing coverage as most directors did. Because they were like, I know that if I shoot a close-up of this thing that I want to only play in a wide shot, the guy from the studio is going to come in and say, we're cutting in right here. I don't want that to happen, so we're not shooting it. And therefore, you have what ends up being a classic moment in a movie that someone would have ruined if given their way, that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess something you said, Michelle, about editing. You said that people think that it all happens in the camera. I don't think it's that exactly, but I think continuity editing works on people. And what that is that like continuity editing basically tries to not let you see the seams. Like it wants you to just see actions continuously. So like you'll cut on an action of, say, someone's opening a door, you see them reach out, and then you cut to the door opening or their hand touching the doorknob and the door opening or something. And maybe that happens in 2, maybe it happens in 3 shots, but you don't even really clock that it's happening because it's just done very smoothly. Whereas a movie like this, the thing that was innovative at the time was this idea of montage. And this is a separate idea. I think it should be said out loud from the idea that I think most people think of montage. It's not like the Pretty Woman montage of like trying on all the clothes or something. Even though that is a form of montage, but it's not this. Like basically the idea with montage is, in a way, is something drawing attention to itself, even if you're not sure what you're being drawn to with your attention. But the goal is not to be fully invisible. It wants you to have these moments of like, oh, I'm noticing something happening here. Like something is having an effect on me. And the other part of it is like something we have talked about on the podcast in the past. I don't remember in relation to what movie, but the Kuleshov effect of...
Wait, I'm sorry. Can we stop and talk about the montage thing a little bit more? Because I definitely...
Well, this is part of it.
Okay, because I definitely thought it was montage, like how I think we typically use it today. And I was like, I don't remember.
The Karate Kid montage.
And I was actually going to talk about like, oh, it's interesting that like if this is where montages originated, like I feel like they're typically used in like much lighter fare today. Like it's almost like a trope of like rom-com movies. Like I know they're in other movies, but it's like montages are used as this like a glow up, right? And so anyways, but obviously I'm not using it correctly. So can we just talk about it a little bit more? But maybe it's going to tie into something else. Okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know if there is writing out there, or I'm sure someone did some explainer video on YouTube at some point about like how the idea of a montage in the modern Hollywood sense, so to speak, is or is not related to the Soviet form of montage and the Kuleshov effect, which we have mentioned on the podcast on a previous episode. I don't remember what movie we were talking about, but basically the Kuleshov effect is you have shot A followed by shot B, and in your mind, it synthesizes into essentially a third shot that doesn't actually exist, which is an idea or a feeling that you take away from the combination of those shots. And the example everybody uses, because it was like this experiment that Kuleshov actually did, was a stoic man's face in a close-up, and he cuts to 3 different pictures. Soup. He cuts to soup. He cuts to a girl in a coffin, a little girl in a coffin, and he cuts to
a woman.
I don't remember.
A woman on a couch.
A woman on a couch, sort of like lounging. And so when he asks people what they took from that, even though the same exact shot of the man was used, cutting to each one of those, you get hungry, you get sad, you get lustful. And that's like the power of editing, especially in the sense of Soviet montage. But I mean, I think that they sort of, I don't think that that's something that wasn't already happening before, but I think it is the idea of like just kind of leaning into it to the degree that a movie like Battleship Potemkin does that is innovative. It's like we're all about this. I think it was like something that was happening, and maybe people didn't even realize why it was happening, you know, like, because I think part of what happened in the Soviet film industry was basically that they were like, what makes a movie work and how can we use that to project our message to the masses? And so like, that's what the importance of the Kuleshov effect is. They were like, if you do A and B, which people are doing, why does it have this effect? And what can we do with that? And then you get a movie like Potemkin and other Eisenstein movies and other Soviet movies. And then from there, it takes off as that influence grows around the world. I feel like I'm talking too much, so please, somebody jump in.
Well, I thought that was really used to a good effect with the maggots. Because, you know, when you did see those come up and then the doctor was gaslighting them saying like, oh, these are just eggs, just boil them down or do whatever and then eat them. You immediately side with the with the crew people because you're just like, why are you doing this to them?
Yeah.
And it's just part of the whole struggle with that. So
right.
I felt like that was used really effectively in that situation.
I think these days probably, push back on me, anybody on this podcast or listening to this podcast later, because I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head here. But I think a genre that uses the Kuleshov effect a lot is horror, because, and especially like a movie like, which you can debate whether this is actually a horror movie, but it's at least a slasher movie, but Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, famously, you never actually see the knife go into Janet Leigh, but you think you did. And that was the trick of what Hitchcock did. It's like people watched that scene and they were like, you can't have this in a theater. He's like, show me the shot where the knife went in. You can't stop me. I didn't break the rules. And because there were actually rules then about what you could put on screen that you could break and get in trouble for. But he didn't break them. And he kind of had them over a barrel is the way I've heard it explained, at least. Anyway, again, I feel like I'm talking too much. So
I enjoyed some of the stuff that they were doing in the Odessa steppe sequence. The lion rising up.
Yeah.
That was really cool. And just all that was obviously like the most interesting part of the movie for me was that whole time when they were in Odessa. The townspeople's reactions to everything. And yeah, I never thought about it until I watched some of the videos that you did, send us to give us a little context about the types of editing and the types of montage that they were doing. Yeah, I never thought about how if you just watch a row of, officers walking down steps with weapons, you might have some like idea of what might be happening. But then juxtaposing that with all the people running and everything, it's so telling the story just through the action, which obviously I would assume in silent film is like extremely important because you can't tell it in any other way other than visually, really.
Right.
So I thought it was cool to learn about that because I am also one of those people that I'm just like, I just go along for the ride. I don't think too much about the editing or anything like that unless it is really noticeable. It was good to learn a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think you're pointing to another example of like, I don't think you ever see those soldiers in the same frame as the townspeople until close to the end of that sequence, if ever. I'd have to go back and look.
Maybe,
but I think it's cutting away to them. Sorry, Michelle.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe in a wide at the end, like you said, when they reach the bottom. Maybe,
yeah. But it's definitely the juxtaposition of soldiers, people, and there's pacing there that like builds towards a clash of them, and and then you see stuff like the woman with the glasses. That's such a famous shot that's been imitated in movies from like The Godfather to, I don't know, spoofs and stuff too. But you don't see a bullet go into her, but you see shots being fired and you see the cracked glasses and you know what happened, so that's another example of like the Psycho thing and whatever. Stephen.
Another interesting thing I noticed about it, I'm watching it the second time, is most of the crowd shots that we saw, and it wasn't exclusive, but most of them were older people and there were women or there were children. So that just kind of pulled in again with the propaganda and
Right.
using those images to really, garner sympathy for the revolution just by seeing those scenes. And you did see a lot more like the person who didn't have the legs. And then I noticed in a couple of the crowd shots, you did see someone on crutches or, just older infirm people. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to kind of portray, instead of just like able-bodied men that were getting shot, it was just other people.
Yeah, great point. Mia?
I really loved the visual scene of all the little skiffs that the Odessa residents have. They were all going out in their little skiffs out to the battleship to bring them
right.
piglets and chickens and fresh food and all this kind of stuff. And I just thought it was like a really beautiful scene of like all these like little like white bird kind of boats going out to them. So I just love that shot, period. But I was just wondering, Stephen, you made me think like, was it supposed to be maybe like, yeah, I agree, like as like propaganda, like, yeah, it is better if there's like women and infirm people and children being bulleted and bayoneted down. But like, was it also like, oh, all the men are doing this on the boats right now?
No, that's possible. But I also thought it was like they were giving them what they had. Like they were literally giving them the stuff that was from there that they might need. Like they were giving them like the one chicken, or they were giving them like, one piglet, or like, and they were in the small boat. So I felt like that was representative of it. But
for sure.
I didn't really pay attention. Yeah.
I definitely agree with you there.
Pay attention if they're all men doing that. But yeah, that's a good possibility.
Michelle?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's an intentional choice to, show the most vulnerable, and like the epitome of the most vulnerable is a baby in a carriage, like going down the steps, and the mother's just been killed. So what was I going to say? And then another scene that I found the editing really effective was before the Odessa steps, when all of the townspeople are mourning the sailor, and there's so much emotion, and then you're the floppy haired guy, that he's so distinctive, and like, and the woman with like just such dark eyes, and you're following them, and you're getting caught up in their emotion and their facial expressions, and then the weeping older woman, and then it cuts to like their fists, like a close up of fists, and I think at least once it's kind of like boom, boom, and so I think that's when, if you're looking for it, you really notice that, you notice those cuts. But I think the goal is, to not notice it, because you're so caught up in the emotion and the storytelling. To go back to modern day montages of like rom-coms or like 80s movies, I feel like, I'm sure there's more at work here, but I feel, just off the top of my head, I just feel, when I think back to them, I think that those types of montages, their like primary reason is is to just go through time, right? Like you see like a relationship develop, and
it's an abbreviation tool.
Yeah. But I'm sure that there probably are some conventional montages like that throw something in, throw a little Kuleshov in, or something. Yeah.
Totally. I guess one thing I want to kind of back up to is, I think before I was explaining like montages drawing attention to itself, and I think maybe something Michelle said made me think like maybe that's the wrong way to phrase it. It's more that it doesn't care if you notice it. Like it doesn't matter if you notice it as much as with continuity editing. It's going to make big leaps, and it's more about the impact of that juxtaposition than trying to hide that there is a juxtaposition, which is what normal continuity editing is trying to do. So I just did want to come back to that and see if that helps at all with the understanding of that. I guess this was everybody's first time watching this but me. So were there moments from the movie that you recognized in other movies? I'm curious.
Definitely the baby buggy.
Yeah. So what movies what did you notice it from or recognize it from?
I think it's like cartoons. Oh, The Untouchables.
Yeah.
I did see that one.
So I didn't like recognize anything, but then like Jeremiah and I watched some like, here's all these things clips from other movies, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, there is a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Some of them I thought were a stretch, but
Sure, and I just don't think it's
Yeah.
stuff that obviously I hadn't seen this movie, so I didn't. I don't know. Like now that I've seen it, maybe
Right.
I'll see it more. You know what I mean? But I'm just curious. Like, wait, what cartoons?
I can't point to a specific cartoon, but I just have like an image in my head of like seeing it. Maybe I even saw it in one of the videos that you sent us. I don't know. But I
Like
just
Looney
feel like,
Tunes or something.
yeah, probably like a Looney
Yeah.
Tunes because
Mhm.
they referenced so many things in Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
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 The Godfather, the
Mhm.
woman shot through the glasses, and then
Mhm.
Yeah.
I forgot Mo. Is that?
Mo Green.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
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 The Untouchables, I thought that was an original thing when I saw because I saw the Untouchables a while ago, and I was like,
Yeah.
hey, wait, that's from there. So
They even have sailors in there as sort of like a tip of the hat,
yeah.
that's true.
But the video that Mia's referring to that we watched, some of the connections they made, it seemed to be like if there were stairs, they were saying it was
Yeah.
Odessa steps, and I was like, that's a little far-fetched. Just because something happens on the stairs doesn't mean it's referencing Battleship Potemkin.
The Joker on the
But-
stairs isn't a reference to Battleship
Yeah,
Potemkin.
exactly.
I mean, maybe it is,
Maybe
but I don't
The
know.
staircase. Oh my
Oh,
god.
the staircase
guys.
documentary.
We'll solve
Yeah.
it. We did watch. I've never seen The Untouchables, but we did watch just that scene
That
last
scene,
night too,
yeah.
Mhm.
or 2 nights whenever we watched the movie, and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna have a panic attack watching this." It was so good and so stressful.
You should watch it.
Yeah.
It's a really good movie.
I think I will.
enjoyed it. I should watch
Yeah.
it again. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I would rewatch it. I watched it. That was one of the movies I watched when I was up late with our baby when she was still taking middle of the night feedings. So probably scarred her for life.
I was about to
But,
say, I don't know if I co-signed on that.
Yeah. It's a really good movie though.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like it. So Mia, you had a question for the group?
Yes. Okay. So my question is, does the fact that a movie may have been made as propaganda take away from its quality?
Well, I think so. Did they ask him to make? Is that what you said? They asked him. I think like if you're given lemons, you make lemonade. Like I think he did something really, really cool with the movie that he didn't necessarily need to do, and it was really
Mhm.
effective. So I don't think it necessarily affects the quality of the movie. I do think it puts a little different spin on it contextually. But
Right.
yeah, like I said earlier, for me, knowing what followed the revolution might have hindered my enjoyment of a little bit. So maybe it does affect like watchability or entertainment factor or something. But in terms of just the quality of the movie, I don't think it did.
Right.
I agree with you, Alicia. Yeah, I clearly Eisenstein was an artist, and as what we've read about him, yeah, he seems like he took this opportunity to make a good film, and yeah. So what I think, despite it doesn't matter what the intentions are. If it's a high quality work, then it doesn't detract from that.
I'm kind of mulling that over, but I don't know if it does. It might, just because I don't know who actually looked at the film and told him to take things out, or like, was he given free reign completely? And unfortunately, I don't know like any of the
I don't
history
think
of
free
him,
reign
so.
existed in the Soviet Union for filmmakers, and filmmakers especially, because they were basically like a arm of the Kremlin, is my understanding.
Well, I would just say, just because he was doing so many experimental things, and it seemed like this editing style hadn't really, not that it didn't exist, but it wasn't used in this specific way, that he would have had pushback on that to make it more straightforward. So that's why I was thinking, like, was there something in there where
No,
like,
I mean,
we like
if
the way it is?
anything, this what he was doing came out of Soviet efforts to kind of explore what could be done with movies. So he was kind of part of this Soviet movement handed down by the state, in a way of saying like, we want to see how movies work and figure out how we can use that to our advantage. Now go and do something with that. And that's where the Kuleshov effect came from. And then this movie is kind of built off of that, putting it into practice, and also meant to just dramatize this historical event that they want the people who just went through a revolution to feel good about and be like, yes, we're on the right path. We used to be here, then we had a couple of revolutions, and now things are on the upswing. So I think he was very much following orders in a way, but I do think he also, as has been alluded to, found his space within that to follow his own whims too.
Yeah, I think that it doesn't really matter then, because it's the end justified the means, kind of, because, it was an enjoyable movie. I felt like, the propaganda did its job and people like were receptive to it. So
I don't know. Do the ends justify the means? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm torn on this too.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, just a couple of things real quick, because I did read a bit. So originally, like I mentioned earlier, the Soviet powers wanted to make a movie that was about, I think, 8 different events from the 1905 revolution, but they didn't give Eisenstein like a budget and a plan or anything until June, and they were like, we need the movie by the end of the year. I was like, LOL, this sounds like just work today. Like and he was like, he like did some filming and was then like, I can't do this. And I don't know exactly like how the conversations went, but and I don't know if he made 7 other movies that were those parts of it or something, but obviously like he made just this one movie about this one thing. Like he literally took one event from their list of 8 and created this whole movie and like expanded some parts of it and moved some things around and things like that. So in terms of like state control of it, it did seem like he had a little more flexibility than what I would have imagined. But again, I don't know if he like went on to make other films that were just more like standard propaganda films and didn't really reach the like mass global audiences like this one did. To me, I guess it's a difference between like technical quality and then like film quality overall. Like I don't want to say like story quality, but like something else. And maybe someone else can help me come up with a word here. Like obviously, like technically, like he advanced filmmaking so much with this movie. And like, I mean, he could have been making a movie about like whatever and it wouldn't have mattered, because I think he still could have put these techniques in that and made it a really impressive technical movie. But I think that knowing that it was like specifically made for the state to be a propaganda film, to me, maybe if it doesn't take away from its quality, I feel like you have to know that watching it. And I'm like totally on the side of like tear down the rich, like end the czar now. Like, I loved this movie. It worked on, I was there and it worked on me. But I think, I think that has to come with like you need to know that watching the movie. But one other interesting thing that I read too is that I'm blanking on the guy's name now, but like the Nazis propaganda
Goebbels,
yes. He was like, oh wow, like what they're doing in Russia is amazing, and actually reached out to Eisenstein and was like, I want to like can you make me a movie like this? And he was like, no. He was like, what you're doing is terrible, and like I'm not going to support any part of this.
Yeah. Wait, is that what he said, or did he say, I don't like German films, so I'm not going to do that?
Well, what I read,
that's different. Yeah.
What I read was more, I mean, I was paraphrasing.
I'm not sure. You might be right. I asked.
What I read was that he issued a statement that he wrote a letter to Goebbels where he said that National Socialistic Realism did not have either truth or realism. And to fuck all the way off. I don't know. I thought that was cool. And then it was just interesting. I couldn't quite follow all of it, but just like where the movie was banned and where it wasn't, and where the alterations were made and where they weren't, and all of that. Like, again, it was kind of just a bit too much for me to like deeply engage with, but just the ways that like even a propaganda film can be re-propagandized or hidden from people or whatever. And then what does that mean about the societies that are doing that?
I read somewhere in there that Eisenstein wanted the movie to basically have a new score produced every 20 years because he wanted every generation to kind of like make the movie its own in that way and connect it to their revolution, because he wanted it to continue having an impact in that way. So I think that tells you something.
I do think if you don't know that it's Soviet propaganda and you don't know what comes after this, I do think it's still a powerful story about overthrowing people that are treating you badly and exploiting you. And I do think that is a valuable, good story.
Speaking of propagandists, has anyone seen any Leni Riefenstahl films?
I saw Triumph of the Will.
Oh, okay. Now,
Yeah.
Did you find the filmmaking impressive?
Yeah, that's what I was going to actually bring up.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
I did. Yeah, it was incredible. That movie was, I saw it in college for, I think I was taking so it was like some sort of social science class. But yeah, it's just an impressive film just in general, in terms of like just seeing the people and you know, it's definitely like it's an intense movie. And I remembered one of the shots. It's been so long since I've seen it, but like you think that you're looking at just a field and it's people. Like there's that many people that are at one of the rallies. And it's just like, that's just so effective in what you think about like what the Nazi party is capable of. And it was just an incredible, shots and, it's kind of vaguely coming together for me. But yeah, I felt like that was an impressive piece of filmmaking. And, do I really think that, that propaganda doesn't work? It does, because of stuff like that. And it's the same thing with Birth of a Nation. That's another movie that I did see that was also like a propagandist film. And just being an African-American person, I couldn't put myself behind that, but I could understand how that kind of worked on people, just the way that, the film was put together. You could, it pushed certain agendas, and it worked on people who were ready to receive it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, this gets to something that I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with, the fact that all art is political to some degree. It's making decisions about its place in the world. And some are just a lot more political than others. When you're making something like this, obviously it's political, but like even Pretty Woman, since we mentioned it earlier, that's a political movie in its way. It's got some politics behind it about like who people are and their place in the world and stuff like that. So I'm being very serious when I say that, but I do think the context matters, as has been mentioned. Like that's what my opinion is that it really matters who the person was, what their intention was, outside of any mandates that they might have been operating under. And I hate to say it, but unfortunately, it also depends on who won. Because I think there's a reason people will say that Triumph of the Will is a super impressive movie, but then be like, but, I don't support it or anything, because it's connected to a message that is diabolically terrible. And also, fortunately, the Nazis lost. So it's easy to write that stuff off. The Soviet Union went on for decades after this. And so it had space for the art to kind of like flourish and be influential and transform into other things, like including something like Mirror, which we watched for this podcast by Andrei Tarkovsky, which is a very different type of movie, but also made under the same general system that made this movie, the descendant of it, at least, But I think in terms of the context of Eisenstein, I can't say that I remember his whole biography. I've read up on him at various times, like in college and whatever. But like, he seems like he was two things. He was very much a Soviet operator, and I think he believed in the cause, but he also was an artist who deeply believed that cinema was a thing that was worth figuring out and pushing forward. And he did a lot of stuff in that regard, including with this movie, but also with others. And he seems to have always been interested in finding out what he could do with movie making. And that was one of his at least twin goals, I think, in anything he did. I do think he was perfectly fine with like getting the company line out and, helping the cause, because I think he did believe in it, even though maybe that waxed and waned over the years. I think he fell out of favor at some point and then came back. So I can't remember his full biographical history or anything, but I do think context matters is the main thing for like whether propaganda can, whether something being like explicitly propaganda takes away from the quality of a movie. Yeah.
You also never know how people are going to interpret it once it's out there, and it can be misused. And like, I could easily see either side of the political spectrum, interpreting this as Yeah, go start a revolution.
Yeah.
So.
I think this shows, because like, again, like I think, technically, obviously, like I think this is great. And I agree with what you were saying earlier, Alicia, where like even propaganda or not, like it's a good message, right? Of like downtrodden people rising up and stuff. Totally. I guess to me, this is why like media literacy and critical thinking skills are so important and need to be taught. And it's just scary because it feels like, all art is political. We were kind of chatting on this. I think, Michelle, it was before you came on, but like, so much of like the quote unquote news today can be propaganda. I'm biased, so especially on one side, in my opinion, but, and it just feels like people aren't, they're not paying attention to things, that there's just not the way to comb through them. So anyways, not trying to take us on a tangent, but that to me was why I wanted to have this discussion here about this propaganda movie. Because it's like a propaganda movie from almost 100 years ago about an event that was even longer ago. But like, I think a lot of the ways of thinking about this movie and grappling with it in that specific context, like, are so relevant to everything we're going through today.
Right. Maybe a different spin on the question. I'd be curious if anybody has a different answer for this. Is can a movie kind of overcome its beginnings as propaganda? Because I feel like the history of this movie is that it was almost immediately influential in a way, and definitely in the following decades. Because like I said, like you have Hitchcock and other filmmakers who are obviously influenced by the Soviet school of filmmakers, whether it be this movie or others, so something quote unquote good came out of it, even if there's quote unquote bad things also attached to it, if you want to, depending on what your viewpoint is of what is good and bad in this situation,
I don't know if this answers the question you posed, but I just was thinking also timing, makes such a difference, because this is a seminal film. It was a seminal, filmmaker, and the aesthetics and just the styles of filmmaking were so different and classical back then. And I feel like, the propaganda filmmakers of today are using the techniques of like what Fox News does, or even CNN, flashiness and like really gratuitous editing choices and styles. And
what you seem to be suggesting, correct me if I'm wrong, is that like documentaries are kind of where this kind of propaganda lives today, more so than like, do you really see a movie like this? Is it, and why is that? Is it because like audiences today don't want to be confronted with that kind of a movie? Or is there any movie that is not a documentary that you can think of that is as clearly propaganda as this? Like, does that happen anymore? And in a forum where people are actually going to see it as a form of entertainment, separate from being propaganda. You know what I mean?
I didn't see it, but I've heard that people said that American Sniper was kind of propaganda.
Oh, that's a good point. Sure. Yeah, I guess you're right. That is definitely propaganda, I think, in its way. I mean, I don't think it's not state sanctioned, obviously, but I mean, I guess you could get into the MCU. There's been like a lot of flack against the MCU and even Top Gun because of the participation of the military, or if not participation, fetishization in a way of militaristic viewpoints that, in a way, that's propaganda. I mean, I don't think necessarily some of that is being made explicitly for that reason, but it's still there, especially with something like Top Gun. I think like it's really painting, the armed forces, its heroes that need to be very revered, I think, or at least some of them.
As the saying goes, you put a frame around anything and it glamorizes it, so that's, as was said, all art can be political. So, and you're going to have a point of view from the filmmakers and then how the viewer interprets it, as somebody else mentioned earlier. Yeah, I think we could have a conversation about almost every film out there, you know. But some are more overt than others, and then with documentaries, and people have criticized like Michael Moore, and
right,
haven't seen any of Dinesh D'Souza's documentaries. Don't want to.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like it's hard. It's hard for me to call something propaganda that isn't like made by the state. So yeah, that's why it does feel like you could call any movie could be propaganda if it's just a word that we're just saying promotes a specific viewpoint.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, if something is specifically made for propaganda like this movie was, and I do think you can overcome that though. And wasn't The Passion of Joan of Arc, wasn't that kind of also not propaganda per se, but wasn't it also like...
Well, sort of, yeah. It was made, it was sanctioned by the French government, right? I think is what we discussed when we covered that in our very first episode.
Because they wanted to like gin up some national pride for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I think that's also...
Well, I think it was like between the two world wars, like I think people were still kind of reeling from the first one, headed towards the second one, whether they knew it or not. And, there was seemingly a need to rally people to something, I guess.
Yeah. So I just feel like it's, if done well, then yes, I do think it can overcome that.
That's a good point.
Just two quick things. When you started to say The Passion, Alicia, I thought you were going to say The Passion of the Christ, which I've never seen, but which
Christian
I think
propaganda
could definitely be qualified as propaganda based on the commercial or the previews and things I saw for it back in the day. So add that to the list. Also, if we're saying that any movie is propaganda, I would like to take out a class action lawsuit against like every rom-com from the 90s that convinced me like someone would come and just like give me a makeover and fix my hair, and like all of those, like a montage would happen to me, because I feel like that was very much a specific...
Just take off your glasses.
I know, yeah. I didn't...
fingers through your hair.
I know. I didn't have glasses, but like, yeah, I thought like that equivalent thing was going to happen, and like, oh my God. But yeah, so anyways, I feel like a whole generation of young ladies was fed that propaganda, and to their detriment.
Well, you mentioning The Passion of the Christ reminded me that when we were kind of going back and forth about the propaganda aspect of this via email and stuff, like it did occur to me the idea of there's a whole lot of religious movies that come out now that none of us go to see, as far as I know, but like
produced by Kirk
they
Cameron.
have an audience, they make money.
Kirk Cameron?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think he's even like, he's small potatoes compared to some of them. There's some that are more like closer to crossovers, like I don't know if the Kirk Cameron ones come out in as many theaters or if they just go to video or streaming or something.
We saw a preview for one though. They're all like,
there's one now with Kelsey Grammer, like called Jesus Revolution, that's out in theaters now, where it's like about this preacher, I think in the 60s, who becomes friends with a bunch of hippies, and it's
a few years ago there was a pretty big pro-life feature film that some people I've from my hometown posted about going to see, and they were pushing it, and I watched the trailer. I can't remember what it was, but it was truly frightening. So yeah, it's out there.
Yeah. So those are our thoughts on Battleship Potemkin. We'll share our final thoughts on the movie and answer our bonus question after this break. And we're back. So, what was your favorite scene or moment or some element of the movie? It doesn't have to be a scene. It could be like, a shot. It could be a character that you saw for a second, whatever. Something that really stuck out to you and you really loved. Michelle, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I was really taken by the, I believe it was the third act, with the townspeople and the workers visiting the deceased sailor on the dock. And just because, as we talked about earlier, the faces of the people, the expressions, everybody was so passionate, even though you didn't know what they were saying, but you felt what they were feeling. And I just loved the energy and the the editing and the performances.
Okay. Stephen?
I think I had mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but there was parts of when the crowd was coming to see the dead crewmen, and just the shot. I don't know if they're on a bridge or they were on some sort of part of land, but just the amount of people that were walking there was just incredibly impressive. And then it made you think, like, they're going to see this person who's pretty much a nobody, but still he had such an impact on them that they needed to kind of come and see and bear witness almost to it. So I felt like that was very powerful.
All right. Mia?
Not like favorite because I loved it, but probably what I'll remember the most is in the Odessa steps scene when the 10-year-old boy gets shot. But what really got me was when everyone was stepping on him, and that just really, especially I mean, there's a fucking school shooting every week, but there was one this week. And so just watching that and thinking about our country and where we are just really affected me. And his mom carrying him and going back up the steps and facing the soldiers and all of that.
Yeah. Alicia?
I mean, besides everything in the Odessa steps stuff, there was a scene at the beginning, towards the beginning of the movie, where this shadow of a grill is over a guy's face. I guess I'm the only one that remembers this because everyone's looking confused.
Wait, when
it was
was
towards
it?
the beginning of the movie. I think he was the guy that was cooking, or he was doing something. It's such a confusing time, so I'm probably not even explaining this correctly. But they opened the door, one of the officers opened the door to see what was going on in there or something, and there was this shadow of the grill or something, not the grill that you cook on, but a grill that's just up as part of something on a boat or whatever. That was on his face, and I was I just remember when I saw that, I was well, it's an interesting shadow light thing that's happening there. Anyway.
Okay. I'm going to be super basic and just say the Odessa steps sequence, because I hadn't seen the whole thing in full in a long time, and I could feel myself tensing up and really just reacting to what was going on in the scene itself, but also the filmmaking of the scene is just so effective. So I was really feeling that, and it was nice to see that it held up to my memory of it, if not surpassed it. So, has the movie, as far as you're concerned, stood the test of time, or another way of framing it? Do you think it resonates today? And Mia already basically answered the question earlier in the show, but do you have more to say?
Yes, I absolutely think that this film has stood the test of time, and I definitely think it still resonates today. Like we have discussed, I think propaganda is all around us. And so I think watching this, living in Florida with the fascism just creeping in everywhere, it was really inspiring watching these people overthrow their terrible overlords. So I liked that. And, like I discussed in my favorite scene, the woman with her child just really moved me. And I don't know, I just really felt oh, wow, I think this movie would have hit any week, but just for me, really the, what's it called? The Venn diagram of violence and children and fascism. It was a good week to watch this movie. So, yeah.
Okay. Stephen?
I think it does, just as a piece of propaganda, because it's very effective in what it does, and it does make you sympathize with the little people. And then also just knowing that this kind of set the stage for how montages were made, and it was a really groundbreaking piece of storytelling in movies that makes it kind of stand the test of time.
Michelle?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the story at its heart is timeless. It's just it's one of the 7 stories that just keeps getting told over and over again. And then, really struck by a lot of the filmmaking elements just felt really modern and fresh. I think a lot of people, when you think about watching a film from 1925, you just think it's going to be stodgy or, musty or something. But I felt like it just, it felt really relevant and what do I want to say? Yeah, just modern. And yeah, Alicia, I think I remember the shot you were talking about. I think there were at least a few of those types of shots that really played with light and shadow, and it was almost like an abstract, very striking imagery throughout. And that's another piece of the film that I felt made it feel really modern.
And Alicia.
Thank you for giving me some acknowledgement that I didn't dream that scene.
Yes. No.
I feel like the conversation around it and the themes resonate. I don't know if, for me, the movie didn't necessarily stand the test of time. I was a little bored during it, and the Odessa steps sequence definitely holds up. But the other stuff for me, I was like, I could tell how confused I was by what was happening in the beginning. And I had a hard time with it. So I don't know about that. But, and I do think other movies have been made about, similar themes since then, maybe not in the same artistic way that this one was done, but in their own artistic ways that I think you can still get the same, idea from it. So for me, I don't know if it stands the test of time, but I'm glad that your daughter watched it, Michelle, and was into it. So maybe, that just says how wrong I probably am about my opinion on
There's
this,
no right or wrong.
Yeah, for me personally, it wasn't like a fun watch, but it's been a fun discussion.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I find nice about this show. I think for me, anytime I'm not that into the movie, I at least enjoy talking about it with everyone here on the show, because it just makes it a little. Either we all slag on the movie and that can be fun. One particular case I can think of recently, or someone kind of their joy of the movie kind of rubs off and it makes it more enjoyable, and just the conversation itself is enjoyable and kind of attaches itself to the movie. But for me, I do think it stands the test of time. And I'm trying to kind of parse this. I don't always try to parse it. I think it's like just the same question stated twice, but I think it does resonate today for the reasons that especially Mia has pointed to, of it being about like this struggle between people being oppressed and the oppressors, and fascists, basically, I guess. But I think that there's an argument to be made that in a way this is the first modern film, and it is almost 100 years ago, which blows my mind. And maybe that's putting it too strongly, but like I said, I think there's an argument to be made, because I think you go from like the early movies where essentially a lot of them anyway just filmed plays in a way of you just are watching some stuff on a screen that you could have seen in person somewhere, and it just is the same. Then you have the developments of, like, especially if not started by, at least kind of pioneered and pushed forward by D.W. Griffith, unfortunately in one particularly bad movie or problematic movie, and then a bunch of others that whatever. He has a complicated legacy is the point, but he kind of took it, he and people around him kind of took it to another level of saying, like, the continuity editing thing is a way to go, and cross-cutting. And, it doesn't just have to be a film to play. This is its own medium, and it can have its own rules. And then you have Eisenstein and the people out of the Soviet Union coming up with the ideas that we see in this movie of, we can even go past that. There's another leap to be made here. And, like, I think the things that when we were younger, people would talk about as like the MTV style are straight out of this, just like it's about cutting and how the cuts make you feel. And if you notice the cuts, who gives a shit? It's fine. So I just think that it's impressive that it still feels to me and to a lot of us here, very relevant still, for the reasons that made it seem relevant then. I don't think that always happens. Sometimes it's like, the first thing that does a thing pales in comparison after you see all the things that came after it. And I think this one is still like, you can see it there and you can understand why it was a huge deal, and it can still impact you maybe in a way that's similar to the first people who saw it. So I think that that's super impressive. So why don't we go ahead to our bonus question, sort of related to this movie, and we touched on it earlier. Battleship Potemkin has been paid homage to quite a bit. So what's a favorite movie or moment from a movie that pays homage in some way to some movie that came before it? And Stephen, do you want to start us off on this?
It's kind of a stretch, but in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, when they drop the car off, and those two guys who work at the garage are driving the car, and you see it like flying overhead, and they play the Star Wars music.
Oh yeah,
and it looks kind of like the Star Destroyer when it's sliding down there. So I was thinking like, oh yeah, that's kind of like a Star Wars montage or like a Star Wars callback kind of. So I thought that was kind of a fun
thing. Yeah, I don't think that's a stretch. Mia,
I love Ferris Bueller. That's such a good movie.
Me too.
We should watch that sometime. So mine is a movie that I actually talked about on the podcast, like, I don't know, a few months ago. It's this newer movie called Do Revenge. I can't remember if anyone else had seen it. Yeah. Oh, of course. Okay. Yeah. It's so good. It's like super fun, and it's just a total homage to all the like 90s like Clueless and 10 Things I Hate About You, Cruel Intentions, Heathers, Jawbreaker, like that whole era of movies. So I feel like if you like those movies, you would definitely like this movie. And I just thought it was like a really fun, colorful, bright movie. And yeah.
All right, Michelle.
So in Everything Everywhere All at Once, the scene when Waymond and Evelyn when we're in the life of Evelyn as a glamorous movie star, and they're in the alleyway, and I just thought that is definitely an homage to Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love, which is another one of my favorite. They're both two of my favorite movies, and aesthetically and composition wise with the shot, and I actually looked it up earlier today, and there's a lot online that supports that, and so I was not alone in thinking that. And in an article I read, it talked about how it's even beyond just the aesthetics and just like tipping the hat, to like Wong as a filmmaker, but how Everything Everywhere, it plays with time and the multiverse and regret and yearning and missed opportunities or choices made, choices not made, and that's totally what In the Mood for Love is about. And the Daniels actually do talk about like how that movie and his movies influenced them in writing this film. And so, and I found this. I'll send the link to you. I found this video. I think there are a bunch of videos. It's called In the Mood for Everything All at Once. And some dude cut together, I think it was like 4 minutes long. And it made me cry. It was like a mashup of both films and with like sound. And I think it's mainly the dialogue from Everything Everywhere. But they would talk about, missing each other. And then like he cuts to, Tony Leung, Maggie Cheung from the other movie. And it was really moving and it was really beautiful. So,
yeah, if you want to send us the link to that, I'll put that in the show notes for this episode.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
Yeah. Good choice. Alicia.
So I'm going to also mention a movie I've already talked about on this podcast before, but Frances Ha, there's a sequence where she's running down the street and Modern Love by David Bowie is playing. And that's like a straight up rip-off of this French movie called Mauvais Sang, which means bad blood. It's not that old. It's like from the 1980s, and I watched it, but I can't remember what it's about. But it's some kind of French tragic comic romance type of movie, and it's really a cool scene. Like you can just find the sequence itself on YouTube if you just look up. Probably even if you just look up Frances Ha or Modern Love, David Bowie, Mauvais Sang. But yeah, it's a cool
It's Modern Love.
It's
in
Modern
that movie
Love.
too?
It starts off with another. It starts off. He's like, oh, he's talking to Juliette Binoche, and he's saying like, what music do you want to listen to? Give me a number, whatever. They like tune into some radio station, and it's like a French love song that's playing, and then that song ends, and the DJ is like, and now for, I don't remember, for Jacques and Arrondissement song or something. Modern Love by David Bowie. In that movie, that song kicks in, and he like does this move, and then he turns and starts like running down the street and like, you know, basically doing similar, you know, crazy dance moves.
So that can't be a coincidence, right?
No. I'm sure it's a direct. I'm sure it's purposeful in Francis Ha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my pick is The Graduate being referenced in Jackie Brown, because they basically have the exact same title sequence of, in The Graduate, Dustin Hoffman's character, Ben Braddock, I think his character's name is, and then in Jackie Brown, Pam Grier as Jackie Brown, on the moving walkway in an airport going forward, and you just see the titles there. And it's just a nice way to open a movie. Nice. And let's move on. So our next episode is Steven's sixth pick. Steven, you want to tell us about that?
Sure. The next movie we'll be looking at is Modern Times. It was directed by Charlie Chaplin, released in 1936, and it's available with a subscription on the Criterion Channel or to rent via Apple, Amazon, Google. And you can probably find it in other places as well, since it's a silent film and it's a little older. I'm sure there's some other free sites you can look at, like Canopy, or like even at the library. Sometimes you can find that.
Well, that's it for this episode of Stereoactive Movie Club. You can subscribe to the show just about anywhere you listen to podcasts. We invite you to join our conversations about movies by joining our Facebook group, and you can find a link to that along with our email address, links to a lot of the places where you can find the show and other info by going to stereoactivemedia.com/Stereoactive Movie Club. If you have a moment, please rate and review the show on Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows you to do that. It helps others to find the show, and we really appreciate it. Also, you can get updates about this show and plenty of other stuff by following Stereoactive Media on Instagram or Twitter. Thanks for listening.
Stereoactive Movie Club.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.